Okay, let us begin. Good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your week off. And we continue with our course. We continue with the topic which will consider the phenomenon of a human being and the phenomenon of the world from the Eastern Christian perspective. We come back to our usual scheme, which divides the entire corpus of theological knowledge into two domains. One is theology and the other one is economy. And the domain of economy, which means everything related to the created world, it begins with the incarnation, continues with the church, the topics we have already considered. And it also includes ecology and anthropology, the topics that we will be discussing today. Let us begin with ecology. Ecology is a very familiar word to you, and everyone knows that it is about environment. But we will consider ecology in a broader perspective of everything related to the created world. This topic from the theological perspective includes the idea of creation of the world. In the Christian traditions, regardless of which they are, all Christian traditions hold that the world has been created by God. The traditions may vary, and there are discussions about evolution, about how the world evolved, developed, whether there was an evolution or there was no evolution. We will not touch on this discussion now. The common ground for all theological traditions, including the Eastern one, is that the world has been created by God, and the world has been created from nothing, from zero. In Latin, it is called ex nihilo. It means from nothing, from zero. This idea is common for the Eastern and Western Christian tradition. And this idea implies that there was nothing before the world. We cannot even imagine what was before the world, because even the phrase "what was before" the world is a kind of oxymoron. It's a self-contradicting phrase, because before implies the existence of the world, and we cannot talk about time beyond the world. Time is part of the world. So even time was created together with world. Time as a sort of development of the world, within the world. It cannot be outside, at least from the Christian perspective. This Christian tradition contrasted the traditions, the ideas about the origins of the world in the period of antiquity. There was a common idea in the world of antiquity that the world is eternal, that the world always existed. It was transformed constantly. It was not the same always from the antique perspective, but there was something like a world that always existed, and there was no time without the world. Also, the traditions of antiquity consider the world developing in circles. So they looked at the world like developing like this one, coming back always to the same points. Somehow through the processes of destruction and regeneration, the Christian concept of the world was different. It became linear, so that from the Christian perspective, the world began in the point zero with the creation and then continues like this. The world may have some circles in development, but essentially it's a linear kind of development. So this is the difference between the perception in antiquity, mostly in the Greek antiquity, and in the Christian theology. Is this clear, guys? Okay, yes, please.
Could you elaborate a little more on
Coming back. Well, this cyclistic. I mean, I think.
like cycles?
Yes, the cycles. Yes. Quite a number of philosophers in antiquity consider the world that the world gets destructed and gets reborn again after every destruction. That is the idea of cyclic kind of development of the world. That it always pre-existed, and at the same time it came to its end. But every time the end of the world also gave a new beginning to the world. So that is the idea of cyclic development of the world in the period of antiquity. Okay. A more detailed elaboration of the concept of creation of the world from nothing, ex nihilo, was authored by the person whom we already considered, whom we already studied, Athanasius of Alexandria. Who can tell me who is Athanasius and what was theology? Remember, he lived in the 4th century. His opponent was, who was his opponent? Arius, yes. And what was the discussion between Athanasius and Arius?
That the father, I mean, it's not like this, that one of them was like more like a hierarchy and the other one they were created equal at the same time.
In the Trinity.
And they never existed without each other.
Exactly. So they discussed essentially the relationship between the Son and the Father in the Trinity. And out of this discussion, the problem of creation of the world emerged. And Athanasius paid a particular attention to the idea of creation of the world, because this idea of creation of the world was different from the idea of birth of the Son from the Father. So, in order to underline what that the Son is really God and the Son is born from the Father, in order to emphasize this idea, Athanasius developed a contrasting idea of the creation of the world by God. In other words, his point was that by emphasizing the difference between creation of the world and birth of the Son, he stressed that the Son was born from the Father. Therefore, the Son is God. So that's from this discussion, as I said, the concept of creation of the world not exactly emerged, but Athanasius put much weight on this concept. He actually developed this concept in much detail. Particularly important for us that Athanasius, in order to demonstrate the difference between the creation of the world and between the birth of the Son, introduced the concept of will. I mentioned earlier that the concept of will was absent in the antique philosophy. Philosophy in antiquity did not operate the concept of will. Will was a part of what was called nous, mind. The Greek word will, thelema, or thelesis, was included, was a part of a larger thing which was called nous. Nous means mind or soul or anything which is related to the spiritual, intellectual side of the human being. Nous as different from sarx, from flesh, from body. Okay? In other words, in antiquity, not in classic antiquity, nous related to everything which is spiritual, intellectual in the human being. That included also will. So will was absent. If you would talk to a person from classical antiquity about the will, that person would never understand you, because that concept was absent. And this concept actually was introduced and elaborated upon by Athanasius in the context of the controversy against Arius. Okay? The point of Athanasius was that will is really something that differentiates the creation from the birth of the Son. Because when God creates world, God employs His will. The creation of the world is a decision, a voluntary decision of God. That's why the world, the existence of the world, owes to the will of God. While the birth of the Son happens without the will of God, because it is a natural process. It's not a process. Process, again, it's a metaphor that signifies the relationship between the Father and the Son, the eternal unity as one God. And this unity does not include will. This unity happens not because of will, but because that is how God is. Okay? So the idea of creation of the world, as well as the category of will, emerge out of the controversy around who is Jesus Christ. Okay? That's how we have these ideas. These ideas sprang from the discussions around the deity, the divine character of the Son in the 4th century in the East. Okay? Is this clear, guys? You see how ideas which we consider as kind of perennial, as really important, they actually emerge out of problems, controversies in a particular period of time and in a particular setting. Okay? Any question regarding this? Yes, please.
So what does nous have to do with this?
Nous, yes. In the 4th century, the category of will was differentiated from the category of nous, mind. In classical antiquity, nous included will, right? After the 4th century, thelema or thelesis became distinguished from nous. So the human will was comprehended as a different faculty, capacity of the human soul, of the human being. It does not mean that will became separated from mind, from nous. Remember, we make difference between distinction and separation. So will does not go apart from mind. They still stay together. They constitute one holistic, one whole human being. But in the late antiquity, in the 4th century, these two faculties of the human being became distinguished, not separated, distinguished. Okay? Well, from the perspective of modern psychology, this sounds quite primitive. But for the 4th century, it was really a quantum leap somehow in understanding of the human nature and in understanding of the world, in physics, what we can call psychology and physics. Okay? Another important idea that shaped the Christian understanding of the world is the idea of the fall. Who could explain us how do you understand the fall? You've probably heard of it. Who wants to? Yes.
The fall refers to Eve takes from the forbidden fruit from the tree of life, and it was forbidden, and there was like a covenant with God that if they didn't, they could have anything in Eden besides this one fruit from the tree, and so she's tempted by the devil to have it, and once she has it, it introduces original sin, and so then they become aware of the fact that they're unclothed, and it brings sin into the world, and so this is the fall of humanity, and so now we have sin. Exactly, absolutely so, yes. In the East and in the West, it was a common idea that the fall resulted in a kind of existential crisis of the world. The fall changed the entire universe. It was not just, a moral misstep of the first couple, but it had tragic implications, consequences that affected the entire created world. This also means that the fall affected the nature. It affected the human nature, and it also affected the entire nature, the entire world. And this is a common kind of ground of understanding of the world for the East and for the West. Okay? However, from this common understanding of what is the fall sprang several interpretations how the fall affects human nature and the nature at large. These interpretations varied, and in this point, actually, the East and the West somehow differentiated from each other. There were two basic approaches, two basic interpretations of the effects of the fall upon the human nature and upon the entire world. According to one interpretation, the world changed substantially. The world which was created, which had been created by God, became something different from what it was when it was created. The change was explained in the categories of evil, so that the evil was introduced to the world, and according to this particular interpretation, the evil became incarnated in the world. The evil became substantial. The evil became something that you can feel, that you can touch, that you can accept. And this interpretation
has been called as dualistic. It means it introduces polarity, bipolarity in the perception of the world. The world became divided into a good part and a bad part. The world became divided into black and white. The black part of the world became substantially black. It means the evil became something essential, substantial. The evil became matter. And in this particular interpretation, the matter became evil. The matter, the material world, was interpreted as the incarnation, embodiment of evil. The kind of marginal interpretation of this particular point was articulated by the movement which was called Manichaeism. Manichaeism. It's like here. This word comes from the name of a philosopher who lived, well, in Persia. His name was Manes, and he actually articulated the idea that the world is divided into two parts. One is essentially evil, and another one is good. And he had a lot of disciples. He had a lot of kind of followers who accepted this idea of the substantial evil in the world, that the evil exists as a substance, as a matter in the world. And still, actually, this a worldview, which is black and white, still sometimes called Manichaeic, exists now. You can find people who would subscribe to this now. If you take the so-called fundamentalists, they are Manichaeic. They see the world in black and white. They see the world as divided into, goodness and evil. And because they have this worldview, they act accordingly. They hate the part of the world which they consider evil. They don't accept it. They oppose it, and hence different, tensions and struggles. Here in the United States, you probably heard about different sects that, just look down to their own kind of community, don't accept others, hate others, may even kill those who don't want to leave the sect. So there were really different instances which represent this Manichaean worldview. Behind this worldview is essentially this black and white perception, which was named a Manichaean. Yes, please.
You say matter, do you mean like matter is like...
Yes, I'm just coming to that point. Yes, matter means matter. Primarily it means body, human body, which was regarded as the incarnation of evils. And anything which is material, food, the nature around us, the matter was considered as the incarnation of evil, as opposite to the spirit which is a kind of sparkle of God, which is good, which is the only good thing in this world, the spirit. This spirit is somehow encaged to the matter, and the matter is like a prison for the spirit. That was actually the idea of the Manichaeans. They consider themselves as sparkles of God, of the spirit, being encaged to the matter and waiting for liberation from the matter, from this cage. There were many anecdotes about Manichaeans. For instance, there were some consistent Manichaeans who lived outside of cities, in the desert, like monks, hermits, and other Manichaeans who could not be as consistent as they brought to them food. And because those Manichaeans considered food as evil, they cursed those who brought food to them. So they accepted this offer, this gift, but they had to curse them because food was actually, being a matter, was the incarnation of evil. Necessarily evil, but evil still. It's a strange mentality. Probably don't understand it, but that's how it exists, and still it exists in some, religious movements nowadays, even in this country.
So on the left, that's the dualistic interpretation.
That is the dualistic, yes.
And then what is the
Yes, we are coming to that side right now. So in parallel to this dualistic interpretation of the world as an incarnation of evils, another interpretation developed, which is different. It doesn't have a name, actually, this interpretation. Well, the name is just normal, which sees the world as existentially good. That everything which we can see, which we can touch, is substantially, existentially good. Because everything is created by God, and God cannot create bad things. God cannot create evil. That's why even when we abuse things, when we make them harmful to ourselves, those things remain good because they are created by God. And it is not those things which need to be blamed. It is us who need to be blamed for abusing, misusing those things. Okay? According to this interpretation, actually evil doesn't exist. Evil doesn't exist in a sense that you cannot identify, you cannot extract a substance of evil from something. Evil doesn't exist in this world because only created things exist in this world, and God created them, and therefore God cannot create evil things. Well, there is evil, but evil is not an existent phenomenon. It's not something that you can actually touch, you can see as a thing. There is evil, but the verb which was applied to evil was not to exist. The verb was non-existent. It sounds strange, but that's how people expressed it. You cannot say that the evil exists, because then you give existence, you give substance to something that doesn't have substance. However, we know that there is evil, and we denote this evil by the verb non-exist. To say that the evil doesn't exist in this particular context means that there is evil, but we use the verb non-exist, doesn't exist, to this phenomenon. The evil exists only in our freedom, in our intention, in the way how we use good things. Okay? Even demons, even devil, is not evil per se. Demons are not a substance of evil. Demons are good creatures of God, but the way how they use their freedom makes them demons. That was a basic idea of what is called Christian Neoplatonism. Christian Neoplatonism, which kind of culminated in its development in the 5th, 6th centuries. And its main figure was Dionysius the Areopagite. The Areopagite. Who is a very strange person. We don't really know his real name. This is a pseudonym. he took this pseudonym from a person who was a disciple of Paul from the Acts of Apostles, who lived in Athens, and who was a judge at the Areopagus, at the court in Athens. And for a very long time, until actually the modern times, people thought that this was actually the real Dionysius, the Areopagite who is mentioned in the Acts. But the scholarship, people like Erasmus of Rotterdam, for instance, identified that this was actually a fake kind of identity, because the person was different than this Dionysius. And still, the scholars, volumes of books have been written on the identity of this guy, and scholars still do not agree who was that. There is more or less consensus that this guy lived towards the end of the 5th century, beginning of the 6th century in Syria. That is the only thing we know about him. But he influenced tremendously theology. Dionysius, for instance, introduced the concept of hierarchy. It was his word. He coined the word hierarchy. Before him, the word hierarchy didn't exist. He also introduced this idea that evil does not have matter. Evil does not exist. There is evil, but its mode of existence is different from the mode of existence of material things, of everything that is created in the world. Okay? This concept of non-existence of evil, meaning not substantial evil, became really liberating for many theologians, including Augustine, for instance. Augustine, in his early career, in his early age, was Manichaean. He was a follower of this sect. And he was liberated from this worldview, black-white, dualistic worldview, by the Christian Neoplatonists, by this idea that evil doesn't exist. Therefore, you don't need to hate, your body. You don't need to hate other people. You don't need to hate food, nature. You have to love them because they are created by God, and evil doesn't exist, doesn't sit in those things. Evil sits in yourself. So you'll find evil in your intention, not in the matters, not in the things. Okay? Is this clear, guys? What do you like more, Manichaeism or Neoplatonism? Good, yes. I like it too. So this idea, actually a Neoplatonic idea of non-existence of evil, changed the attitude to the world and the attitude to the human beings. In the classical Platonism, it's interesting that in the classical Platonism, body was regarded as something bad. The Greek word soma was equated to the Greek word sima, which meant coffin. So the body was regarded as a coffin for soul, something bad. People actually waited to die, to liberate themselves from this coffin. And Neoplatonic attitude was different from Platonic, even though Neoplatonism originated from Platonism, but it developed a completely different idea about body, so that body became something good. And actually this idea of good body was developed within Neoplatonism, but Neoplatonism which was distilled by Christianity. In the Christian setting, Neoplatonism became appreciating about body, okay, and about nature. Is this okay? Let me schematize this. So in Plato and among the Platonists, body was a coffin. Okay. Then in Christianity, at the same time, there was a tendency of Manichaeism that regarded body as the incarnation of evil. Manichaeism. Again, it was not the only interpretation of body and of nature in Christianity, but it was one of them. Then Neoplatonism came. It developed approximately in the 3rd, 4th century, but in Christianity it was taken by the Christian church in 5th, 6th century. And in the Christian setting, Neoplatonism, which came from Platonism, in the Christian setting, developed this idea about body and nature, matter being good, essentially good. Okay? Is it clear now? Good. That's how gradually philosophy and theology, Christianity, became appreciating body and appreciating the world, because from the Christian perspective, the human being and the world were closely, intrinsically interconnected. The world was considered as home for human beings. Hence is the word which was applied to the world, ecos, or oikos, which means home. This word gave birth to the term ecology. Ecology comes from the Greek word ekos, oikos, which means a word about home. That's why we can speak about the Christian ecology with the central idea of home, the world around us, the environment as our home. Which means that you need to take care of your home. You don't need to destroy it. You don't need, to pollute it. You don't need to put all your garbage to your home. You need to take care of your home. So the Christian idea of ecology comes from the word. And the intrinsic connectedness of the human beings with the world was expressed in the term which was applied to the human beings, and which presented a human being as microkosm. What microkosm means to you? What does it mean?
Small. Something small.
It's something small, but what?
And living.
Yeah. Anything more than that? Yeah.
Is it a microcosm? It's like it's imitating something else.
Exactly. Absolutely. Something else what?
God? An imitation of God?
Not exactly. Any other idea? So what does the microcosm imitate?
In nature.
Exactly. The cosmos, the world. So there is a big world, cosmos, which is reflected like in a mirror in the human nature, which is called microcosm. The microcosm works in, there is a kind of bilateral two-way road in relationship between the microcosm and the cosmos. Let me write this for you. So there is a big world. Oops, it doesn't work. there is a big world, and there is a small micro world, or microcosm, which is a human being. And this small micro world reflects this big world. And not just reflects, they are intrinsically connected with each other. So that the condition of the human being reflects the condition of the world, and vice versa. That's actually how the fall happened from the perspective of theology. Because the human beings, Adam and Eve, sinned, their condition changed. And as a result, the condition of the world changed as well. I want to come back to the picture that I showed you in the beginning here. It's exactly a kind of representation of the relationship between a human being and the world. Because the desert was kind of happened in this human soul, the desert in the world became kind of extension of the condition of the human being. That is the Eastern kind of idea about the fall that affected the entire nature. And this became possible exactly because the man is the microcosm. Because the man, a person, human being, can affect the entire world around him or her through this connectedness, through being a microcosm. Okay? And the relationship of a human being with the world also reflects the way how the person is fallen. Essentially, when when a person or humanity or a group of people, a society, a state, destroy nature, try to dominate over the nature, this reflects exactly the fallen state of the human nature. This reflects, from the theological perspective, this reflects how the human nature exists per se. The modality, the bad modality of the existence of the human nature reflects or translates into the attitude of dominion, of abuse, of destruction of the human nature. And the restoration of the human nature in God would imply that the human beings would be more caring about them. So that's how the restoration of the human nature in God translates into ecology, to the ecological, to the Eastern perspective. Okay? Which means that Christian ecotheology is not does not put human beings on the same level with the rest of the beings, animals, birds, or fish, or whatever. It means that from the Christian perspective, ecology is still anthropocentric. A human being is in the center of it. Say, the condition of a bird or of an animal does not affect the condition of the entire world, unlike in the case of the human being, who is actually the cause of the fall and of the restoration of the nature. Also, the Christian theology does not consider the world in pantheistic terms. We have already seen with you what pantheism means. What does it mean? What the word means? Pantheism. Remember, we were talking about polytheism, yes?
Okay, wait, never mind. I thought it was pantheism is when God is like nature.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
When the entire world around us is seen as God, as deity. So if you go to places like Hawaii or to Grand Canyon, you will find folks there who believe in the nature, as God, as deity, or to venerate it in this way. This is a pantheistic approach which is shared by. And because man, a human being, man, I mean not just a male individual, but a human being, is a microcosm of the world, is a reflection of the big world. This also gets connected with the incarnation. Remember, we were talking that incarnation, the idea of incarnation of God, that God became man, is central to Christian theology. So if we see what happened in this scheme, that God became man in the person of Jesus Christ, right? God united with man in the person of Jesus Christ, embraced human being. This translates into embracement by God of the entire world, of the entire universe. This means that God became related to the entire nature. It doesn't mean that God became incarnated into nature, into trees or animals or fish or whatever. No. It means that through the human being as the microcosm, God reestablished connectedness with the nature that he had created. It means that all the nature became somehow unified, embraced by God. This was called in the 2nd century by this theologian whose name was Irenaeus of Lyon. We were talking about him. This was called by the word recapitulatio in Latin, or in Greek, it's a very simple word, anakephaleusis. I hope you'll remember it. Which is exactly an exact translation of the word, Latin word recapitulatio, which means to have something on top as your head, actually, as your head, if you want. It means that the nature, the entire world became headed by God. Okay? The entire world became reconciled in God. The unity, the integrity of the world was restored. The integrity that had been damaged through the fall, through the incarnation, this integrity was restored. And after that, God became the head of the entire universe through the human being as the microcosm in the incarnation. Okay? Is this clear, guys? So this theologian who lived in the 2nd century could be called an eco-theologian, a theologian of ecology, who provided a theoretical kind of framework of understanding of the world, of the cosmos. Yes?
So, according to him, is that then a hierarchy that's been established, or do they not see it as a hierarchy?
Yes, it was a dynamic hierarchy. That on the one hand, certainly God is superior to man, man is superior to the created world. But through the incarnation, all of them, they began moving towards God, towards unity, towards integrity. It doesn't mean that the distinctions, separations between human beings and the nature will ever disappear. It means that they coincide, they cohere in their integrating process with themselves, within the created world, and with God. Yes?
So which view of the fall did he have?
Very positive, appreciating not this, not the dualistic one, not the Manichaean one.
Okay.
So for him, body was excellent, was the creature of God, and should be appreciated, should be celebrated, just as the entire nature, because body, human body became also the body of God in Jesus Christ. Okay. Is this clear, guys? Right. So it implies that if we take seriously incarnation, we should appreciate nature. We should appreciate human body, and essentially this understanding of the world, which comes from the idea of the incarnation, is contrasting, is different, is contradicting the Manichaean dualistic black and white of the world and the world. Okay. Right. So this was one of the interpretations of the human nature. We have considered some of the interpretations, and we need to distinguish between three basic interpretations of the human nature as they emerged in the Christian, both in the East and in the West. And they constitute three different concepts of the Christian anthropology, three different attitudes, three different approaches to what is human nature. One attitude, we can call it pessimism, which considers the human nature as completely corrupted, as alienated, as not identical with what it was created, with what it had been created by God. So the sin, the fall, introduced a radical alienation to the human nature and a differentiation of the human nature from what it had been. Okay? The human nature became different. That idea was in a very radical form supported, held by Manichaeans, and still in Augustine, who is the greatest theologian in the Western Church. Although he was liberated from Manichaeism by Christian Neoplatonism, still he considered the human nature as profoundly, deeply corrupt. The same idea was retained during the Reformation, particularly among the Reformed churches, the Calvinist churches, Presbyterians and Puritans. They actually, the Puritans that established their communities in this country, in New England, they came with this perception of the human nature which stemmed from Augustine. That the human nature is fundamentally bad, fundamentally perverse, fundamentally corrupted. That's why we need tough communities, we need tough discipline, we need to punish those who don't obey, who don't follow the line, and we hate the rest. Actually, that perception, this attitude comes from this interpretation of the fall and of the human nature, which we can call pessimism. On the other margin of the spectrum of the attitudes to what is human nature is what we can call optimist attitude, which means that the human nature has never changed. It remains the same even after the fall. Nothing happened to it. It is the same, absolutely the same. What this nature needs is just a good example, a moral example to follow. This idea was articulated first by the Nestorians. Remember Nestorians, right? Who can tell me about the Nestorians? We have been talking about them since the beginning. Yes, please.
They believed in two separate natures.
Exactly, and subjects.
Yeah.
In whom?
In Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. And they believed that the human nature of Jesus was not actually different from our nature, in the sense that they were completely identical, and our nature is good, is not corrupted. It actually does not need salvation in the same sense as other Christians believed at the time. It means just a good example to follow, a good moral model, which actually Jesus for human beings. In the West, in Europe, in the 17th century, the Enlightenment movement emerged. What is the Enlightenment? Yes, the re-establishment of the reason as the main criterion. What else?
Isn't it mostly about how they started to look towards the sciences to explain life?
Not just the science, but also everything.
Like math.
The world, man, human beings, society, everything. And actually the Enlightenment, which was born in France, in England, and spread throughout the world, and actually reached the United States and created the American statehood, the product of the Enlightenment to a great extent. And the Enlightenment had arrived at a specific perception of the human nature, which was exactly the same as the Nestorian, optimistic one, which sees the nature as essentially, fundamentally good, non-corrupted, not affected by any corruption, by any change after the fall. And remember, it's interesting that this is a kind of coincidence, but it's an interesting coincidence that the Enlightenment introduced the idea of the separation of the church and the state, right? The wall between the church and the state, the Jeffersonian. And the Nestorians had to embrace the same kind of separation in the Persian Empire, remember. So their anthropologies and their political theologies coincided quite strangely. Well, it's natural, but it's just a coincidence. It doesn't mean that there was causal relationship between these two things. Enlightenment, the idea of the Enlightenment emerged as a radical opposition to this passive anthropology. So during the Middle Ages in Europe, the Augustinian, the pessimistic attitude to the human nature dominated. So that the people believe that the human nature is very bad, that's why it needs all sorts of controls from the state, from the church. It needs to be, heretics need to be burned, sinners need to be punished severely. That is because they saw the human nature as requiring a radical intervention from outside. And when the Enlightenment emerged, it just rejected all these medieval perceptions about the human nature. And instead, the Enlightenment installed the idea of purity, of perfectness of the human nature. Okay? Yes?
Was enlightenment a period where people thought if you were naturally good, you would be acting good? So that kind of motivated.
Yes, exactly. That goodness comes naturally from you. You don't need to be forced to be good. Goodness is something that comes in a very natural way out of you. In the Byzantine East, the position, the anthropology was in between this one and this one. I call it realist. Well, maybe it is biased, but it's different from two sides. So in the Christian East, there was always an idea of the fall, of the sin, which resides in the nature. But this perception, this perception did not see the human nature fallen as deeply as Augustine saw. The human nature is certainly affected by sin, but not in the way how it was seen by Augustine. The human nature remains absolutely the same with what it was created, with what it had been created. Nothing has changed in the human nature. It did not, the nature in this sense did not fall. the nature remains the same. What changed, however, was the modality in which the human nature functioned. Because the human nature is endowed with freedom, by making wrong decisions, a human being actually falls. A human being makes mistakes. A human being sins. This sin comes not from the human nature, but from the wrong decisions, wrong choices. This anthropology was articulated by Maximus the Confessor, actually the guy who introduced the idea of micro-world, the human being as the microcosm. And he employed the concept of will. The concept of will, which we already saw in Athanasius. Will, which is a part of the mind, comes from the mind, from nous. Kind of human soul, human mind, which features will, and it is this particular part of the human being which sins, which has been affected by sin, by fall. It's not the entire human being, it's not the whole body and soul. It's a particular part of the human being, of the human nature, which is will, or mind, or the capacity, faculty of the human nature to decide, to take decisions, to have an opinion. Okay? So the radical, from this perspective of this centrist kind of anthropology, these two anthropologies are marginal. In which sense? For Augustine, the entire human nature is corrupted. Here, it is blameless. The human nature is blameless. It's spotless. For this, from this perspective, human nature is good, is the same as it was created, but it is still a subject of sin because of wrong decisions, because one part of this nature, which is will, is affected by sin. Maximus called this part of the human nature gnomic will. Or gnomikothelema. Gnomic will comes from the word gnomi, which means opinion. It's a will that is based on an opinion which can be wrong. It's an opinion that comes from deliberations of a human mind, not from the revelation from God. It's an opinion that actually, which is affected by sin, by the fall. And because we follow a certain opinion, we make a decision which can be wrong and which then leads our human nature to a wrong kind of condition. Okay? So not the entire human nature, like here in Augustine, is corrupted by a part of it, which is will, a category that had emerged in the 4th century. Is this clear, guys? It's like a driver. So in other words, when a driver leads a car to a crash, it is not the car which should be blamed, which is bad. It is the driver that takes wrong decision. Okay? For Augustine, it is the car blamed. Okay? And for Maximus, it is a driver in the car who is to be punished for wrong decisions. Okay? So these are 3 directions in the interpretation of the human nature. And as we always try to do, we try to translate these theological concepts into the real life policies. into political science, and they actually can be projected to the political science, can give us an interpretation of what we now call ideologies. And actually, one can interpret two basic ideologies of our time, like conservatism and liberalism, from the perspective of anthropology. Because this pessimist attitude to the human nature translates into conservative ideology, well, Republican Party programming, which wants more state, more control from outside, which doesn't trust human nature, which is bad because of its fallenness, and so forth. So the entire program actually stems from the perception, from a certain perception of the human nature, which is based on the, if you want, Puritan kind of perception of the human being. Okay? And the optimist anthropology translates into liberal ideology, which completely trusts human nature, human beings, that human beings are good and it is natural for them to do good things. You don't need to have extra control from the state. You don't need to have any extra control from other institutions, from outside. Just trust human beings, and they will do well, will do good by their own. In many cases, the anthropological background of these ideologies has been forgotten. But for some people, especially among the conservative figures, who still kind of have institutional memory of the Puritan background that provided resources for the conservative ideology, it is still a theological matter. It is still a theological. Okay. Would you agree or disagree with this? Did you ever think about the theological background of the political ideologies? Do you want to add something to this?
I just think it's interesting that the conservative ideology comes from this pessimistic viewpoint, but if you look at the conservative population, they're subscribing to the realist.
Yes, that's true. Oh, realism always wins.
That theology anymore.
Yes, I purposely didn't translate realist anthropology into any ideology because I believe realist anthropology does not translate into any ideology. Ideology is always, ideology is always biased. Ideology means the prevalence of ideas over realities. And that's why I cannot identify any ideology here stemming from this.
No, me neither. I just think it's interesting that the pessimistic, the makeup of that ideology that does translate to conservative now, but those people wouldn't believe in the pessimistic view. They would say the middle, and so it's kind of hypocritical. Yeah,
that's true. Well, people who vote for the Republican Party do not necessarily subscribe to pessimistic anthropology. People who produce conservative ideology, they often come from take Stephen Bannon. I think his anthropological views are profoundly as of a Christian thinker. And his views certainly, I think, translate into this sort of ideology. But people who vote for that ideology do not necessarily belong to. I agree with you. Okay? Let's go further. Let's consider another anthropological category, which is important both theologically and politically, the category of freedom. Freedom has become a sort of ideologium, a sort of, a part of modern ideologies. Actually, all modern ideologies operate the category of freedom. Freedom nowadays has become similar to what, in its meaning, in its significance, in its central place, to what in the period of late antiquity was the category of logos. So everyone was talking about logos in the antiquity. Everyone is talking about freedom nowadays. And freedom has a lot of connotations, really heavily charged. You cannot easily define it. You cannot easily translate it into other categories. But let's try, following the same pattern. Freedom in the Eastern Christian theology was always appreciated. And in the 4th century, I found just a few statements in support of freedom. Like, for instance, Gregory of Nazianzus, the so-called Gregory the theologian, called freedom, human freedom and honor. Another Cappadocian, Basil of Caesarea, also from the 4th century, called it a godlike part of the human nature. Gregory of Nyssa, another guy from the group of the Cappadocians, called it even isotheon, which means equal to God. So freedom makes us equal to God. And from the Eastern perspective, freedom is something which is crucial, which is at the center of anthropology, of the human being. Because freedom makes a human being equal to God, the freedom makes human being actually affecting the state, the condition of the world. It's exactly freedom that makes a human being different from animals, birds, and so forth. It's human freedom. It's freedom that makes a human person actually, which makes possible evil. So freedom is an alternative to the Manichaean perception of the evil as substantial, as a part of the material world. Okay? If evil does not exist in the material world, then, according to the Cappadocians, to these theologians, evil exists in the human freedom. Because human beings are free, they can err, they can do evil things. But this is inevitable. We cannot deny human beings being free just because they can err. Because if they are denied a capacity to err, it means they are denied a capacity to do correct things. They always come together, a possibility of doing bad things and a possibility of doing good things. You cannot separate them. If you want to confine, if you want to impose limitations on using humans' freedom to do bad things, you automatically impose limitations on the capacity of doing good things. Okay? They come together always. And when God created human beings, God created human beings with the risk that human beings would err, would go against God. But that was the kind of a part of the deal. You cannot create a free being without a risk of this human being of turning against. That is also part of the relationship, a part of any deal, of any relationship. You can develop any meaningful relationship only when this relationship is free, but this always includes a possibility of turning away in the relationship. It's inevitable. So it's a part of the freedom package, if you want. And that's why when God created man, human beings, he created human beings with the capacity of the fall already. And God cannot prevent human beings from using their freedom even against God. And when a human person, is turning against God, only a human being this person can come back to God without being forced by God. So actually, the human being and the human freedom is the only thing that stands between God and man. And there was a scholastic kind of exercise, half joke exercise. If there is a thing that God cannot do, well, God can do everything except one thing: to force a human person to do something without consent, to overcome human freedom. So that is an essential that is an essential part of the Eastern Christian attitude. And actually, when some people force someone to do what they believe to be good, it's a kind of violation of this package, or the violation of freedom, the violation that even God doesn't do. So you cannot force other people to do things, which is called coercion. That's why coercion is a bad thing from the perspective of Christian theology, because coercion actually violates something that even God doesn't violate. Okay? You always need to persuade someone, not to force someone to do or not to do something. Okay? So that is actually a basic concept of freedom. And again, as I said, this concept of freedom explains why evil exists. Evil exists not in things, but in human decision, in the abuses of freedom. And that is the only way that evil exists, and this is the only way to eliminate it, to apply your freedom. You cannot eliminate evil by destroying things, as Manichaeans did. You can only eliminate evil when you persuade someone to do good.
Are there any mentions of what be evil for one might not be evil for another?
Yes, there are different interpretations of what is evil, certainly, because no one does evil things consciously.
Yeah.
Well, all evildoers in the world thought that they were doing good things, like Hitler. Hitler was absolutely convinced that he is benefiting the humankind by destroying Jews.
Yeah.
And according to Dionysius the Areopagite, whom we already mentioned, even demons, when they revolt against God, they think they do good things. Yeah. Right. So that is the freedom. And again, in Eastern Christianity, evil has two words which have different meanings. One is the word eleutheria, and the other one is to aptexousion. They are quite different, and they, even though they are translated into English and most other languages with one word, freedom, in the original Greek they have different meanings. Eleutheria is something which can be obtained, which can be gained by a human being, a human person, when this person makes right choices. And eleutheria is something that a person can be deprived of when he or she makes wrong choices. So it's a sort of added value to a human personality. You can call it merit, you can call it virtue, you can call it also vice when it is absent. This word has to do with the social status of slaves in the Roman Empire. The slaves were deprived of eleutheria because of their social status, but they could also gain eleutheria when they got liberated, became free. This freedom is it fluctuates. It depends on the human choices. And in this sense, it is different from this freedom to aptexousion, which is innate in the human nature. So that no one, even the person himself or herself, cannot deprive themselves of this freedom. Even if I decide I don't want to be free anymore, I can get rid of this eleutheria but I cannot get rid of exousion because it is in my nature. It does not depend on me, on my choices. And exactly this kind of eleutheria, of this of freedom, that God cannot overcome, to step over it. And when we talk about the human rights, the dignity of human nature, of human personality, this dignity has to do with this freedom. This freedom cannot be taken away from a human person, regardless of what this person is. It can be, a lust, murderer. Well, even Hitler or Stalin had dignity in the sense of exousion of this sort of freedom. They didn't have this kind of freedom, okay, which depends very much on the choices, on the virtues of a person. But a person always has this sort of freedom. It cannot be taken from him or her. And depending on how you, what sort of freedom you emphasize in a human being, it also makes you conservative or liberal. So this distinction between two sorts of freedom translates into political science. I will explain why and how. Here it is. In the pessimist anthropology, which sees human nature as vulnerable to sin, to corruption, this anthropology values eleutheria as added value to human being, and as something that restores the original corruptness of the human, of the fallen human. Okay, and this translates into conservative ideology, which actually considers freedom as a qualitative category, because it is the quality of choices that you make that makes you worthy, that makes you really, a good man, according to this ideology. While in the optimist anthropology, which sees the human nature as intrinsically good, the freedom is perceived as something that the human nature cannot be deprived of, as intrinsically belonging to the human nature. And this is a part of the, idea of the human rights, that human rights do not depend on what sort of personality this person is, right? Every human being has rights, unalienable, right? Rights, and this is exactly where this freedom belongs to. This freedom translates not into the quality of choices, but into multiplicity of choices. The more choices you have, the more the more free you are in this regard. So it's not up to you. Well, you as a person, you have the same freedom, but the more external kind of choices, if you go to a supermarket, the larger is the supermarket. The more choices you have, the freer you are with your innate freedom. Okay? Which is pretty much a part of the liberal ideology. In the Eastern Christianity, the two ideas of freedom coexisted together. So that in the Eastern Christianity, we apply both concepts of freedom. Sometimes, yes, in the Eastern Christianity, like in any conservative ideology, the dignity of the human personality, which is independent from what is a human personality is underestimated. That's unfortunately so. That's why human rights are not always respected in the history. But at least in the theology of the people like the Cappadocians, whom I just mentioned, who envisage the human being as equal to God because of their freedom, these two anthropological views kind of perfectly coexist together.